Hello and welcome everyone, a new episode of Money Means Business. Tonight's episode is going to be dedicated to the preparations ahead of the African Union 5th mid-year coordination meetings, which is going to bringing together heads of states, heads of governments, and also all those involved into the economic circle of the African continent, those concerned with climate change and its repercussions, to be accurate, on the African states. Also, we are going to tackle the most recent, or to review, to be accurate, the most recent comments and analysis by world economic institutions regarding the Egyptian economy. All this and more in our episode, so stay tuned. I'm going to be back right after this. Welcome back. As we said, this episode is going to be dedicated to both the preparatory meetings of the African Union committees and the African Union commits to more continental trade and integration among all African states, all for the best interest of the African people, to shed more light on the whole issue, particularly on the economic side of the meetings of the EU in its fifth mid-year coordination meetings. We are very much delighted to have with us via phone Dr. Ghada Musa, Professor of Economics in Cairo University. Thank you very much for being with us, Dr. Musa.
Thank you very much. I'm a professor in political science, and especially in political economy. So just any kind of a correction.
Beg your pardon, ma'am. Let's start with your general vision regarding the theme of this year, which is accelerating the efforts exerted to establish the African Continental Free Trade Area. This is, I'm not going to say only a dream, but it's a very ambitious plan to turn the African states into other era, to have this integrity, this full coordination and collaboration among all African states to reach to try to achieve on the ground the Sustainable Development Goals. How do you see the theme of this year's edition of the fifth mid-year coordination meetings of the AU?
As you have mentioned precisely, the African Union, after Egypt rejoined the African Union after 2013, it has intensified its role in playing a more crucial role in economic, social, political aspects. The preparation for the summit has thought Egypt as a good presence, a strong presence in the 43rd Executive Council proceedings of the AU at the ministerial level, as a preparation for the fifth coordinating summit of the African Union, which will take place actually tomorrow, 16th July. So one of those plans that Egypt will come forward is, as you have mentioned, the economic integration of the countries, or the countries in the continent, starting from the NEPAD, ongoing and continuing with the COMESA, the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa, to set the agenda for the continent's development priorities and to realize the 2063 Sustainable Development Agenda of the AU. This includes participating in shaping the continent's future through activation of the Continued Free Trade Agreement, which is DREAM, and achieving economic integration in the continent, as well as discussing the issues of finance and post-conflict reconstruction of conflict-ridden countries. As we all know that there are still many post-colonial issues and crises in the continent, especially in Sub-Saharan Africa, and also in the Sahel and the desert area, which continues with Chad, Mali, Niger, Nigeria, and so forth. In addition to also what we call the post-Arab Spring Northern African countries. So, all in all, the African countries are facing a lot of challenges, either because of post-conflict or because of internal political issues, or because of climate change, like droughts, as was happening in the southern part of the African continent, especially in Namibia, for example. So, plus the issues of financing. So, free trade area could facilitate and even make the process of financing or even bringing revenues to the continent countries a reality to finance all these projects and also to realize the...
and there are steps taken on the ground, and there are many of these topics already discussed in the meeting of the Executive Council, which came as preparatory meetings for the fifth mid-year coordination meetings, which is going to take place tomorrow, inshallah. We are going to have, if you permit me, some of the examples of the files which were discussed. For example, His Excellency Dr. Alfred Mutua, the Cabinet Secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Kenya, announced Kenya's plan to progressively abolish visa restrictions for African citizens to facilitate trade and integration and the realization of the 2063 Sustainable Development Agenda. This is, for example, one of the measures to be taken on the ground, to be implemented on the ground, not only on paper. How do you see such measures?
Those measures are very good measures. However, they are not sufficient because these are what we call procedural measures, administrative measures. Those measures have to be strengthened and even consolidated by finance. I want to go a little bit back to the International Summit for the New Global Financing Pact, which was held in June in France in 2020 and 23rd of June. This was the first summit on the new millennium to address the new global financial system as a policy shift in the international finance. And African countries and the continent was targeted with this summit as it addressed inequalities due to poverty and public debt and climate change as well in the African continent. So if Kenya or even Ethiopia, Tanzania, all the COMESA parties, they have to complement their policies in, for example, freeing trade tariffs and so forth. These are good steps. However, what we need in the African continent and what we need from these preparatory meetings and summits is how to actually secure the finance for making it happen, the economic and trade policies that could actually integrate the African continent together. So this remains a challenge that needs to be solved.
Amen to that. And to add to what you have just said, Mr. Antonio Pedro, the acting executive secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, emphasized that industrialization backed with actionable trade policies would attract private sector investments for sustainable development, meaning that one of the important topics which are going to be discussed among all African leaders in this important summit is the big positive role which should be played by the private sector and how to attract the private sector to be involved more and more into many economic fields, particularly the field of industry. Would you please elaborate on that?
Actually, you cannot trade if you do not have an industry. You have to have commodities, right? And the African continent is very rich in raw materials. It's very rich in human capital. So if you combine human capital with raw materials and, of course, good training and good education, then you have an industrialization and you have a structural change within the countries of the continent. And you can have commodities that could be exchanged within countries. We have still commodities. We have also, we do not have a big deficit if we are talking about Eastern countries, Eastern African countries. However, we are talking about the whole continent. We mean, for example, the Francophone and the Anglophone, the Lusophone, and of course the Sahel and the desert and the northern part of Africa. So industrialization or going back to industrialization as a policy that could reinforce trade is of course essential and also very crucial if we wish to have a free trade zone. And if you also wish to have an independent economic and trade policies.
One final question, Dr. Ghada, regarding finance. Since you mentioned funding, you mentioned finance more than once in your valuable answers to my questions. The importance of domestic resource mobilization efforts by the Union to ensure the continent is financially self-reliant to bridge the fund gap. Well, many would say that what I've said is just a dream, and to take it into consideration that this is something which we can fully implement on the ground, or this is a mission which can be fulfilled by the year 2063. This is something which is saying that we are going to work hard century ago or something. But if we start from now, do you think that this is a goal which can be achieved through this period of time, or we are going to need much time for that, or if we do have the will and determination, it's easily implemented?
Of course, you have just truly mentioned it's about political will. And the nature of the African continent is that it is actually, it faces a lot of challenges. Among them is the political stability. So you cannot actually achieve, economic development, economic growth, unless you fulfill the political stability. And this requires a will, because it will secure, if you are politically stable, then you have funds, you have finance to secure or to fulfill and implement your developmental policies.
Dr. Ghada Musa, Professor of Political Science in Cairo University, thank you very much for your input and have a very good evening. Well, right after the short break, we're going to return back with more. Stay tuned.
بناتي وأبنائي شباب العرب وإفريقيا، حلمنا في المستقبل. لقد صنع شبابنا العربي والإفريقي نموذجاً يحتذى به ويمكن البناء عليه في الحوار البناء الجاد، وأكدوا بأن تكاملنا العربي والإفريقي هدف قابل للتحقيق، كما أكدوا بلا شك أن اختلافاتنا هي قيمة مضافة تعزز التكامل ولم تكن أبداً سبباً للصدام والنزاع. شباب مصر والعرب وإفريقيا، أوصيكم بالتمسك بأحلامكم والعزم على تحقيقها دون حيود أو انحراف عن أهدافكم السامية. اعملوا بكل جهد واجتهاد من أجل مستقبلكم ومستقبل أوطانكم. اجعلوا الحوار وتقبل الآخر دستوركم، والإنسانية شريعتكم، والعمل منهجكم. تحيا مصر، وتحيا أمتنا العربية، وتحيا قارتنا الإفريقية، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. نحن لدينا مصير مشترك. مصر تسلمت الرئاسة الدورية للاتحاد الإفريقي لعام 2019، وتتطلع كعادتها دوما للتعبير عن شواغل الشعوب الإفريقية الشقيقة الرامية لتحقيق الاستقرار والتقدم ودفع عجلة التنمية قدما. إذا كنتم ترغبون في تغيير وجه القارة الأفريقية، فالاتحاد الإفريقي كقيادة تستطيع أن تعمل وتدرس بشكل مركزي لمشروع عملاق لبناء بنية أساسية على مستوى القارة. أنا أتصور أن الأمن والاستقرار استثمار. إذا لم تستقر هذه القارة والأمن فيها بمعدلاته عالية، هذا الأمر سينعكس بالسلب علينا كلنا.
Ladies and gentlemen, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi arrived in Nairobi, Kenya, only a few hours ago to participate in the African Union 5th Mid-Year Coordination Meeting, bringing together regional economic communities, regional mechanisms, and member states. And the meeting of the Executive Council as preparatory meetings for the important African Summit already took place to arrange and to prepare a number of files which are going to be discussed between the African leaders who came to discuss integration among African states, coordination, cooperation for the best interest of the African peoples, to accelerate the efforts exerted for the African free trade area, to discuss climate change, and Egypt has a pivotal role. To shed more light on this, we are very much delighted to have with us via phone Professor Dr. Yumna Hamai, Professor of Economics. Thank you very much for being with us, Dr. Yumna.
You're welcome. Good evening.
Dr. Yomna, there is a lot to speak about, and since Egypt as I said, is playing a pivotal role and is the chair of the steering committee of the African Development Agency, NEPAD, I'd like first to focus on acceleration of African Continental Free Trade Area implementation, because this is one of the most important items which is going to be discussed tomorrow, inshallah, and it's going to be for the best interest of all African peoples. If you please elaborate on that before going into more details.
Yes, indeed, the free trade area should be on the focus of every negotiations and meetings among the African countries for this period, since we can consider it as a very important cornerstone toward achieving a better economic development in the continent for the benefit of people. We still know quite well that we have condensation of poverty, relying mainly on basic resources instead of industrialization for the continent, the highest percentage of unemployment, and I believe by that in order to change all these challenges for the African continent, we need to activate economic growth, and by concentrating on more investment, on industrialization, on being integrated into the world economy, in the value chain regarding most of production, specifically in the industrial sector, as I mentioned, and information technology, everything related to that can be quite linked to the free trade area. But still, despite all that, we need to know quite well that it's not easy to achieve the goals and, the prerequisite for a free trade area. We have, as economists, some indicators to specify to how extent we are moving forward in a better situation for a free trade area. One of the most important indicators is the intra-trade and intra-investment. These two indicators can be quite important towards figuring out to how extent the free trade area is moving to a better or to be advanced for the best of the countries involved. Unfortunately, for the African continent, still intra-trade and intra-investment minimal, which means that we have a lot of work to be done in order to activate the free trade area. Still, free trade area is quite new. Since we need a lot of work to be done for that, we used to have regional integration like COMESA, SADC, and so on. Still, we need to put plans regarding the free trade area for the whole countries of the continent. It needs from us harmonization for economic policies on top of the monetary policy and the fiscal policies. We need to standardize production and specify rules of origin for our production. And Egypt has exerted very good effort during its presidency for the African
Union back in 2019. This was my coming question, Dr. Yomna, regarding the efforts exerted by Egypt during this period, during the chairmanship of Egypt to the AU for a full year in 2019, restructuring inside the African Union, and the progress made to enhance the budgeting processes and the financial governance by the African Union, because this should be one of the missions of the EU long ago, but of course better late than never. How do you see these efforts exerted by Egypt, and which continued even after Egypt left the presidency, because Egypt is back to Africa in general, and we are working for the development inside and with the African states, whether if we are occupying the presidency of the AU or no. We are with the sustainable development goals and with realizing them on the ground with all our African allies. And this is a process which started and will never end. If you want to elaborate on this.
Of course, this is a very good question. And actually, achieving sustainable development may be regarded as, a gateway towards, achieving development for the continent, despite that we have to take into consideration that climate change is going to have severe negative effects for the African continent, and at the same time it may prevent the African continent for achieving the main goals like combating poverty and so on. And from here it comes that we have a lot of challenges for the African continent towards achieving sustainable development, as well as, providing the requirement or its population for a better life, enhancing standard of living. And we all know the problems of illegal immigration that nowadays can be regarded as one of the major challenges confronting the world economy. Still, what Egypt has done during its presidency for the African Union by revising the vision for Africa 2063, specifying how the continent can achieve industrialization, not exporting the raw materials, but trying to be integrated in the value chain. Industrialization can be regarded as very important for that, but still the main challenge confronting that is regarding finance from one perspective. From another, the dilemma that the African continent is confronting nowadays, its relation with developed countries, which means that most developed countries use that the African continent is a source of raw materials rather and market for their final product, rather than being a true partner in the value chain, the international value chain. The most important reason behind that is that the African continent is lacking technology. All the time we are importing technology from other countries. We need to develop our technology based on our universities, investing in human resources, in
vocational
our,
training, you name it.
center.
And to one also of the important topics which are going to be discussed, or one of the speeches of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi in front of one of the committees and one of the gatherings which is going to convene tomorrow. It's the Egyptian experience regarding climate change, and under the umbrella of the Egyptian presidency of the COP27, and of taking into consideration that we prepared a lot for this conference which took place in November 2022 in Sharm el-Sheikh, and with all the recommendations, with all the results, positive results, of course, of this event, I think we can add a lot. I mean, this is an added value to what we are going to exchange with our African allies, if you agree with me on that.
Of course, I agree with you, and we have a very promising experience in Egypt, which is Project Noafi. This project actually is derived from the need in our governorate, the need from people themselves, the need of people to address climate change by referring to how to recycle, how to introduce renewable energy in different areas in order to achieve a better economic development. So this initiative can be regarded as a very promising initiative that can be generalized for the African continent. And nowadays, Egypt is trying to strengthen such initiative by having, we have, presented such initiatives, and we succeeded in COP27 to have finance for such initiatives. Still, we need to build institutional capacity building in order to address the need for, investment to address climate change, as well as how to achieve sustainable finance for these projects. Still, we need to work quite hard, and we can generalize this experience for the African continent, because this may add a lot to such experience, since we need, when we achieve sustainable development, to extend into how to build, value chain on a regional level among African countries. This may, help us for industrialization from one perspective, from another to generate more opportunities of job for our youth and women. We are not using actually our human resources efficiently enough. So all these, ideas can be used efficiently if we can generalize such experience. And
in fact,
then
our real wealth,
together
it's our youth,
capability.
and to empower our youth, this is going to be the most important step in a long journey ending with success, inshallah. Well, we were very much delighted to have you with us, Dr. Yumna. Thank you very much for your valuable input. We were delighted to have with us Professor Dr. Yumna Hamai, Professor of Economics. Right after the short break, we are going to return back with more, so stay tuned. reminder, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi arrived in Nairobi, Kenya to participate in the 5th mid-year coordination meetings, bringing together regional economic communities, regional mechanisms and member states of the African continent. And upon his arrival, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, of course, expressed his happiness to be in the Kenyan capital and thanked Kenyan President William Ruto for the warm and generous reception. To shed more light on the Egyptian participation in these important African summits or gatherings, we are very much delighted to have with us via phone His Excellency Ambassador Ahmed Haggag, a former Assistant Secretary General of the African Union. Thank you very much for being with us, Ambassador Haggag.
I was former Assistant Secretary General of the OAU. Thank you. Please.
I beg your pardon, sir. Sir, let's start with the participation of Egypt in this important, as I said, African gatherings or meetings, and to start with I think the most important, or at least one of the most important topics which are going to be discussed regarding the African Free Trade Area and the integration among the African states to achieve or to realize on the ground the Sustainable Development Goals 2063. If you please elaborate on that, and if you please, I'd like to know more about the valuable participation of Egypt to exchange ideas, to exchange experience regarding our economic reform program and how we achieved success on the ground.
I think when President Sisi was chairman of the African Union, the idea and the agreement of establishing a free trade zone among African countries was inaugurated under his chairmanship. And he pushed very much hard in order to agree, I think, in Niger when they agreed about this agreement. Because of the pandemic, it was the corona pandemic, it was postponed for 2 years, but now it's operational since last year. Last year, it became the implementation of such an agreement, and the process of protocols, individual protocols, have also started. This agreement will increase the volume of trade among the African countries without custom duties or administrative barriers, and it increased already the volume of Egyptian export to different African countries, especially those who are in COMESA region, which Egypt is a member. And also, it also increased our imports from African countries because our industry is in big need of iron and other material which is necessary for our industries. The other aspect, I think it is in his capacity as the current chairman of COP27 of the climate change, which was the summit of this conference was held, as you know, in Sharm el-Sheikh, and one of the major agreements which took a lot of efforts from the Egyptian delegation with other like-minded delegation was the idea to compensate and to assist the African countries which are suffering from the climate change financially, which will, we hope it will be agreed finally in the next meeting in Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates.
Inshallah. Sir, also, His Excellency Moussa Faqih, the chairperson of the African Union Commission, in a statement highlighted that the African Union theme for the year 2024 on education seeks to move from the old paradigm based on the acquisition of only theoretical knowledge, often unrelated to African realities, to new knowledge based on logic of action in the face of the existential problems or challenges. how do you see focusing on education and on the education process in specific, and how this is going to be one of the very positive steps taken on the ground for the best interest of the coming generations?
Education is one of the important issues which is facing African countries because of the meager resources allocated to education. Many educated experts from Africa are migrating to industrialized countries because they have a better pay, they have a better environment, and so on. So we are assisting the developed countries in education, and we don't receive any compensation about the cost which the African countries are embarking upon. But education from the elementary till university to PhD is very important. There is now a network of African Union of universities which is trying to exchange ideas and transfer students among different African universities. And also there is a resurgence of interest of education because now families are recognizing that they will not progress in the future without having educated son and a very good high-quality education, not just rudimentary system which will not correspond to the needs of the labor market.
Ambassador Hagag, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi is all the time keen to have what we call the sidelines diplomacy. When he is attending such a gathering, an important one, he is all the time seizing the opportunity to have meetings with his counterparts from all over the world. And this time it was announced that he is going to have talks with his Kenyan counterpart, William Ruto, and in addition to other heads of states who are going also to participate in the important African gatherings. How do you see the importance of these meetings, of these African summits, to discuss ways to boost bilateral ties, to boost bilateral cooperation in all domains?
This is not the proper African summit which is held every year. This is a semi-year which from 2019 it was agreed that the Bureau of the African Summit will hold this meeting on a periodically every half year with the economic groupings in Africa. And it's very important, but the number of the heads of state will be not as big as the other regular African summit. It's very important because it's going to steer the work of the African Union. It is going to agree about the next budget of the African Union. It will cope with Agenda 2063, which corresponds with the 100th anniversary of the establishment of the OAU in 1963 in Addis Ababa. So it's very important meeting, and this will give President Sisi an opportunity to liaise with his counterparts, but I think he is going to hold a very important meeting with President Ruto of Kenya, whom he met twice in Zambia during the summit of the COMESA countries, and also in Paris during the meeting which President Macron invited several weeks ago. Kenya is an important country. It is a potential economic power in East Africa, and we have to give good attention to bilateral relation with this country.
Ambassador Hagag, thank you very much for your input, sir. Always an added value to our programs.
Not at all.
Thank you. And by this we come to the end of our episode of Money Means Business, but I'm going to leave you with the most important economic events which took place in the past 7 days. Till we meet again same time on Nile TV International. Many thanks for watching. This was Nermeen Abdurrahman.